Someone out there right now is about to hand over $45,000 for a car they saw on a Facebook marketplace listing with 6 photos, 2 of which are blurry, and one that's suspiciously cropped at the rocker panel. The seller called it a rare classic, an investment, a piece of automotive history. What it actually is a rotting, fire-prone, money-consuming nightmare wearing a vintage costume. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly which cars to walk away from before the scammer walks away with your money. Here's the thing about the classic car world that nobody warns you about before you fall in love with it. There are genuine classics, cars that hold their value, reward patient owners, and deliver a driving experience you simply cannot replicate in anything built after 2010. And then there's the other category, cars that are old, just old, not historically significant, not mechanically interesting, not investment worthy, just old, rusty, expensive to fix, and wrapped in enough nostalgia that otherwise intelligent people lose their minds at the sight of them. Dealers know this. Flippers know this. The guy with 17 cars parked in a field behind his farmhouse definitely knows this. And today, you're going to know it too. We're counting down 15 so-called classics that are really just old junk disguised as treasure. These are the cars that show up at auctions with paddles flying and leave their new owners crying 6 months later when the repair estimate arrives. We're talking rust that goes all the way through, engines that were disasters new and are catastrophes now, electrical systems designed by people who apparently hated the concept of electricity, and depreciation curves that go in the wrong direction the moment you start fixing them. Let's get into it. Number 15. Pontiac Fiero, 1984 to 1988. On paper, the Fiero sounds like a legitimate classic. Mid-engine layout, 2-seat sports car, built by an American manufacturer during an era when American manufacturers weren't exactly known for building exciting cars. People see one at a car show, the paint catches the light just right, and suddenly they're convinced they've found a hidden gem. They haven't found a hidden gem, they've found a hidden fire hazard. The Fiero launched with a 2.5-liter 4-cylinder engine that was so poorly suited to a sports car application that it became genuinely dangerous. The engine bay ran hot, dangerously hot. Oil would leak onto exhaust components and the car would simply catch fire, not metaphorically, literally. GM recalled over 250,000 Fieros for fire-related issues. There were documented cases of Fieros burning to the ground in parking lots while the owner was inside a grocery store, just sitting there, burning. GM knew about the overheating issues before the car launched, according to internal documents that surfaced later, and they launched it anyway. Then they quietly canceled the model in 1988 after the PR nightmare became impossible to manage. Now here's where the scam enters the picture. Fiero prices have been climbing. Enthusiasts have convinced themselves that the later V6 models and the GT trim are legitimately collectible. And some of them are interesting cars to work on, sure. But what you'll find on the market is mostly neglected examples with decades of deferred maintenance, rusty plastic over steel body panels that are a nightmare to source, and an asking price that reflects what the seller wished the car was worth rather than what it actually is. Walk carefully. Number 14. Jaguar XJS, 1975 to 1996. The XJS is one of the most visually stunning cars ever built. I'll say that without hesitation. Those flying buttresses, that long hood, the way it looks parked in front of anything, it's genuinely beautiful. And that beauty is exactly what's going to cost you everything you own. Owning an XJS, particularly the early V12 models, is not a hobby, it's a second job. A poorly paid second job where your employer is a British car that was built during a period when British Leyland was, to put it diplomatically, not exactly operating at peak efficiency. Labor disputes, quality control issues, and chronic underfunding meant these cars left the factory with problems baked right in. The V12 engine, while magnificent in concept, requires you to essentially remove half the car to access anything worth servicing. Cooling system failures are legendary. Electrical gremlins are not occasional nuisances. They are permanent residents. The infamous Lucas Electrics earned the nickname Prince of Darkness for a reason, and the XJS had more of those components than almost anything else wearing a British badge. Restoration costs on a rough XJS can exceed the value of the finished car by a factor of 2 or 3. Yet these cars keep selling at prices that suggest buyers believe they're immune to that math. They are not. Unless you have a trusted specialist mechanic who works on these specifically, a substantial parts budget, and genuinely nowhere else to be, the XJS will consume you. Gorgeous. Ruinous. Walk away. Number 13. Triumph TR7, 1975 to 1981. The TR7 has one of the most tragic origin stories in automotive history. Triumph had been building genuinely good sports cars. The TR6 was a real driver's car, properly respected. Then British Leyland got involved, the budget got slashed, the engineers got overruled, and what emerged was the TR7. A wedge-shaped fixed-head sports car that managed to be less sporty than the car it replaced while simultaneously being less reliable than almost anything else on the road. Build quality was catastrophic. The Speak factory in Liverpool, where early TR7s were built, was plagued by labor strikes. Sometimes partially assembled cars would sit on the production line for days. You could actually, and this is documented, you could find TR7s where fasteners were missing, where panels didn't align, where the electrical system had been wired incorrectly at the factory. The TR7 effectively killed Triumph as a brand. By the time they canceled it in 1981, the damage was irreversible. And yet people sell these things as classics. British Roadster, iconic wedge design, future collectible. No, it is none of those things. It is the car that ended one of Britain's most beloved automotive names. That's its legacy. Don't pay premium prices to inherit that legacy. Number 12. Alfa Romeo Spider Series 3, 1986 to 1994. Look, I love Alfa Romeo. I want to be clear about that. The brand has produced some of the most emotionally engaging cars in automotive history, and there are plenty of vintage Alfas worth pursuing. The Series 3 Spider is not one of them. By the time this generation launched in 1986, the Spider platform was already ancient. The basic architecture dated back to the mid-1960s. Alfa spent 20 years putting lipstick on the same pig, and by the late 80s the pig was exhausted. Federal emissions equipment strangled the engine. The rubber bumpers that were bolted on to meet U.S. regulations looked like they were designed by someone who lost a bet. The interior quality fell off significantly from earlier cars. But here's the real problem. Because Alfas have this incredible romantic reputation, and they deserve it for their earlier cars, sellers price the Series 3 Spider as though it carries all of that romance and none of the compromises. It carries all of the compromises and a cooling system that will betray you on a summer afternoon. Rust is endemic. Parts are not cheap. And that Romeo engine, which was genuinely lovely in 1966, is tired, emission-strangled, and unhappy by the time you're looking at a 1990 example. There are better Alfas to own. This isn't one of them. Number 11. Maserati Biturbo, 1981 to 1994. The Maserati Biturbo is proof that a famous badge can sell almost anything, at least once. This was Maserati's attempt to go mass market. Volume sales. Accessible price point. A Maserati for the people. What the people got was a twin turbocharged engine so prone to failure that it essentially destroyed Maserati's reputation for an entire decade. The twin turbos ran too hot, the intercooling was inadequate, and the engines would detonate, burn oil, and simply expire at mileages that would embarrass a lawnmower. The cooling system was undersized for what the engine demanded. Electrical issues were constant. Build quality was, and I'm being generous here, inconsistent. In the 1980s, used Biturbos could be purchased for less than $5,000. That pricing was not a bargain. That pricing was the market correctly identifying what these cars were worth to live with. Today, sellers have discovered that if you clean one up, photograph it well, and lead with the Maserati badge in the listing, you can get significantly more than $5,000 from someone who didn't do their research. Don't be that someone. The Biturbo is a cautionary tale, not a collectible. Number 10. Cadillac HT4100 V8 cars, 1982 to 1984. Now we're getting into genuinely dangerous territory. Not dangerous like the Fiero, where the car might catch fire. Dangerous like you might spend $20,000 restoring a car built around one of the worst engines General Motors ever produced, which is saying something because GM has produced some genuinely terrible engines over the years. The HT4100 was a 4.1-liter V8 that GM introduced in 1982 across the Cadillac lineup: DeVille, Fleetwood, Eldorado, Seville. On paper, it was GM adapting to the fuel economy era. In practice, it was a disaster of such profound magnitude that it damaged Cadillac's reputation for years. The engine ran hot, chronically, unavoidably hot. Head gaskets failed with such regularity that many owners went through multiple sets in a single year. The aluminum heads warped, coolant mixed with oil. Engines that should have lasted 200,000 miles were consuming themselves before 50,000. GM dealers were overwhelmed with warranty claims. Technicians who worked at Cadillac shops in that era will tell you stories that sound like war stories, because they were. Here's the scam angle. A DeVille or Fleetwood from this era looks magnificent. Big, pillowy American luxury, every option on the window sticker, the visual presence of a genuine classic. And sellers will absolutely price them that way. What they won't volunteer is that the engine underneath that beautiful hood was so compromised from the factory that finding one in reliable condition today is genuinely difficult. Get a pre-purchase inspection. Get it from someone who specifically knows these engines. Or better yet, find a pre-1982 Cadillac with the old 400 cubic inch and save yourself the heartbreak. Number 9. Lincoln Continental, Mark IV and Mark V, 1972 to 1979. These cars are absolutely enormous. We're talking over 228 inches long for the Mark V. That is nearly 19 feet of automobile. They weigh close to 5,000 pounds. They have opera windows, padded vinyl roofs, and enough chrome to blind an air traffic controller. They are, in their own way, spectacular. They are also tin cans. The rust on these cars isn't a problem you treat, it's a condition you manage. The steel Ford used in this era, particularly on structural components and floor pans, had the corrosion resistance of a saltine cracker left in a swimming pool. Find one that was sold new in the Midwest or the Northeast, and you are almost certainly looking at structural rust that makes the car unsafe, full stop. The engines, the massive 400 and 460 cubic inch V8s, are not the problem here. Those engines are mostly fine. The problem is everything around them. Wiring that has been spliced, respliced, and spliced again over 40 plus years. Hydraulic systems for the windows, seats, and trunk release that leak and fail. Suspension components that haven't been available at a regular parts store since the Reagan administration. People see the Mark IV and Mark V and think, Detroit glamour, classic American luxury, rising values. What they get is a 4,000-pound rust project with a gorgeous interior that smells like 1976. Budget accordingly, or don't budget at all. Number 8. Renault Alliance, 1982 to 1987. You may not know this car. That's fine. Consider yourself protected by ignorance up until this moment. The Renault Alliance was Motor Trend's Car of the Year in 1983. I need you to sit with that sentence for a moment. Motor Trend, Car of the Year, 1983. The Alliance was a French-built, American market car that AMC sold through their dealerships as part of a partnership with Renault. It was inexpensive when new. It was not reliable when new, and it has not improved with age. These cars rust aggressively. The mechanical components are orphaned. Renault hasn't supported this market in decades. AMC no longer exists. And finding parts requires the kind of dedication usually reserved for people who also brew their own kombucha and know what their rising sign is. The engines are small, unimpressive, and tired. The interiors disintegrate. The electrical systems fail. Why is it on a classic scam list? Because occasionally someone discovers one in a garage with low miles, concludes that Motor Trend's 1983 stamp of approval must mean something, and lists it for more money than it deserves. It means something. It means 1983 was a rough year for cars. Don't pay classic prices for a car that wasn't a classic when it was new. Number 7. DeLorean DMC-12, 1981 to 1983. Oh, you knew this was coming. Look, I understand the DeLorean, I genuinely do. The stainless steel body, the gull-wing doors, the fact that it literally appeared in one of the most beloved film franchises of all time. The DeLorean is culturally significant. It is historically interesting. It is a genuinely fascinating piece of automotive and industrial history. It is also, as a driving machine, deeply mediocre. The PRV V6 engine, shared with Peugeot, Renault, and Volvo, produced around 130 horsepower in DeLorean specification, 130, in a car that weighed nearly 3,000 pounds. The 0 to 60 time was somewhere around 10 seconds, which means that in Back to the Future, the DeLorean would not have reached 88 miles per hour before running out of road. The movie only works because nobody actually checked the performance specs, but here's the real issue. Because the DeLorean is culturally famous, prices are culturally insane. These cars routinely sell for $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 and beyond. For a car built on a shoestring budget by a company that was in financial freefall, John DeLorean was arrested in a drug sting in 1982, the same year the company went into receivership. With a middling engine, known electrical problems, and a stainless steel body that shows every fingerprint and every piece of road debris forever. The DeLorean is fun to look at. It's expensive to own, mechanically modest, and the premium you pay is entirely for the movie reference. Know what you're buying before you buy it. Number 6, Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow, 1965 to 1980. I can already hear the objections. It's a Rolls-Royce. How can a Rolls-Royce be on this list? Because the Silver Shadow is the Rolls-Royce that quietly ended the era of hand-built British magnificence and replaced it with complex, failure-prone systems that cost a fortune to maintain. And it did so at a price point that attracts buyers who fundamentally misunderstand what they're getting into. The Silver Shadow introduced hydraulic self-leveling suspension to Rolls-Royce. In theory, brilliant. In practice, a maintenance nightmare that requires specialized knowledge, specialized parts, and a specialized budget to keep operational. When the hydraulic system fails, and it will fail because these systems are now 50-plus years old, you are not going to your local shop. You are calling specialists. You are waiting for parts. You are writing checks that will make you briefly reconsider your life choices. The electrical systems across the Silver Shadow's production run are legendarily troublesome. Lucas Electrics. Again, always Lucas Electrics. Here's where the scam lives. A Silver Shadow looks like old money. Parked in a driveway, it announces wealth, taste, and heritage. And that image commands significant purchase prices. $30,000, $40,000, sometimes $50,000 for presentable examples. What it doesn't announce is the $10,000 in deferred maintenance hiding underneath that beautiful coachwork. Get a pre-purchase inspection from a Rolls specialist before you commit to anything. And budget for ongoing costs that will make you question whether you should have just bought a new truck. Number 5, Chevrolet Vega, 1971 to 1977. The Vega is one of the most spectacular corporate failures in American automotive history, and that history has some serious competition for that title. This was GM's answer to the rising tide of Japanese imports, a small, American-built economy car. Time Magazine Car of the Year in 1971, Motor Trend Car of the Year in 1971, an unqualified disaster by 1973. The aluminum engine block, which sounds like it should be modern and clever, was a nightmare. GM failed to use proper iron cylinder liners in the original design, meaning the aluminum bores wore catastrophically fast. Oil consumption was staggering. Overheating was constant. And then the rust arrived. Not gradually, not eventually. The Vega rusted immediately, aggressively, and completely. Structural rust, cosmetic rust, rust that appeared on cars that were barely a year old in northern states. Ralph Nader, who was already famous for going after the Corvair, declared the Vega one of the most unsafe vehicles on the road. GM engineers internally acknowledged the engine problems before the car launched. Sound familiar? So why is this a scam in 2026? Because nostalgia is powerful and memories are short. Vega prices have been climbing on the back of 1970s nostalgia. Nice ones do exist. later production cars with improved engines, low mileage survivors, and the Cosworth Vega variant, which is genuinely interesting. But the average barn find Vega being presented as a restorable classic is a rust-eaten, engine-destroyed money pit wearing a vintage coat. Proceed with extreme caution and a very thorough inspection. Number 4. Ferrari Mondial, 1980 to 1993. Here's the uncomfortable truth about the Mondial that Ferrari enthusiasts know and nobody says out loud. This is the Ferrari that no Ferrari person actually wants. In a lineup that includes the 308, the Testarossa, and the F40, the Mondial is the one that gets left at the party. It was designed to be a genuine four-seater Ferrari. That's an admirable goal. The execution, particularly in early carbureted form, was troubled. The two-valve engine produced modest power for a Ferrari. The handling was softer than contemporary Ferrari models. The styling, while not without its defenders, doesn't carry the visual drama of almost anything else wearing a prancing horse. But here's why it's dangerous territory. The Ferrari badge commands extraordinary prices regardless of the actual car underneath it. And Mondial maintenance costs are Ferrari-scale costs without Ferrari-scale desirability to offset them. Timing belt services on a mid-engine Ferrari are expensive because the engine has to come out, or mostly out. And when you start there, everything else gets expensive fast. Find a Mondial that's been neglected, which describes many of them, because neglected Ferraris are what happens when someone buys one without understanding what they're getting into. And you're looking at a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 restoration on a car that won't reward that investment in value when you're done. The Mondial is proof that not every Ferrari is a smart purchase. The badge isn't enough. Know what you're buying. Number 3. BMW E65 7 Series, 2001 to 2008. The E65 Generation 7 Series is a car that should have been great. It had every technological advantage BMW could throw at it. Active roll stabilization, integral active steering, the iDrive control system that was supposed to revolutionize how drivers interacted with their cars. iDrive. Let's talk about iDrive. When this system launched, automotive journalists were so uniformly baffled and frustrated by it that BMW actually had to issue a response addressing the criticism. It required hours of learning to perform basic functions. Climate control, audio, navigation, all routed through a system so counterintuitive that several car magazines reported nearly causing accidents trying to operate it. BMW eventually improved it, but the early versions in these cars are still out there, still confusing people, still occasionally sending drivers to destinations they did not request. That's almost funny. The rest of the car's ownership experience is less funny. The V8 and V12 engines in this generation have cooling system issues that are well documented and expensive to address. The air suspension on equipped models fails with regularity. The electronics, and this car has a staggering number of electronic systems, develop faults that require dealer-level diagnostic equipment to even identify, let alone repair. And here's where the scam arrives. These cars look expensive. They were expensive. A well-specified E65 7 Series was a $100,000 car when new. Today, they can be found for $8,000, $10,000, $12,000. That seems like an incredible deal. It is not an incredible deal. It is the market correctly pricing in what it costs to maintain a 10 to 20-year-old flagship BMW with complex electronics and known mechanical vulnerabilities. There is no free lunch at $8,000. There is only deferred misery. Budget $40,000 in potential repairs if you want to drive one properly, or find a different car. Number 2, Lancia Beta and Scorpion, 1974 to 1986. The Lancia Beta dissolved. I don't mean that metaphorically, I mean the cars physically dissolved. The rust on early Lancia Betas, particularly UK and European market cars from the mid-1970s, was so catastrophic, so rapid, and so structurally devastating that Lancia faced lawsuits, a near-total collapse of their reputation in the UK, and eventually withdrew from the British market entirely. The BBC's Consumer Affairs program Watchdog covered Lancia rust complaints for years. Years. The problem stemmed from steel that had been inadequately treated during the production process, combined with design features that trapped moisture against body panels. A car could develop structural rust through the sill panels, the floor, and the subframe mounting points within a few years of purchase. Owners who'd bought new cars in good faith found themselves with vehicles that were structurally unsafe before they'd finished paying them off. The Scorpion, sold in the US, shared many of the same corrosion vulnerabilities, along with an engine strangled by American emissions regulations down to a deeply unimpressive 81 horsepower. Why is this a scam today? Because Lancia has this extraordinary motorsport heritage. The Stratos, the 037, the Delta HF Integral, and that romance gets transferred to everything wearing the badge, regardless of whether it's deserved. The Beta and Scorpion carry Lancia badges. They do not carry Lancia Stratus DNA. What they carry is rust, parts scarcity that is now genuinely critical, and an ownership experience that will test the limits of your patience and your credit card. Genuine Lancia enthusiasts know this. Sellers who are not genuine Lancia enthusiasts would prefer you don't. Number 1. Any barn find muscle car with a numbers matching claim. This is not one car. This is a category, and it is the single biggest scam in the entire classic car world, which is already a world with no shortage of scams. Here's how it plays out. Someone finds a 1969 Camaro, a 1970 Chevelle, a 1968 Mustang Fastback, sitting in a barn, a garage, or an estate sale. The car is rough, floor pans gone, drivetrain seized. Something has been living in the interior, probably several somethings. None of that matters to the seller, because the listing contains two words that short-circuit rational thinking and muscle car buyers more effectively than anything else in automotive commerce: numbers matching. Numbers matching means the engine, transmission, and major components carry identification codes that confirm they left the factory with this specific car. In genuine verified cases, that absolutely adds real value. Nobody is disputing that. The problem is the word claim, because those numbers can be wrong, misread, transplanted from a donor car, re-stamped, outright fabricated. The muscle car world has a functioning cottage industry of people who know exactly how to make a car appear numbers matching to everyone except a seasoned authenticator. And most buyers are not seasoned authenticators. The disaster scenario goes like this: private seller, cash deal, urgency pressure. Other buyers are circling, the estate is closing, the auction is this weekend. You fall in love, you hand over $80,000, $100,000. 6 days later, the restoration shop calls, and you can tell from their tone before they say a single word. Wrong engine, swapped transmission, disturbed VIN plate. You bought a base model wearing a costume. Your $100,000 investment is worth $25,000. Maybe. This happens every single year. At private sales, swap meets, and yes, even reputable auction houses whose cataloging depends on seller-provided paperwork. What protects you is simple. Hire an independent authenticator before you commit to anything. If the seller won't allow a proper inspection, that refusal is your answer. Walk away. The right car will come around again. Your money won't. So there it is. 15 so-called classics ranging from genuinely problematic to outright fraud territory. And look, some of these cars have passionate, knowledgeable communities of owners who know exactly what they're getting into, budget accordingly, and love every minute of the experience. I'm not here to take that away from anyone. If you want an XJS and you know what the XJS is going to ask of you, genuinely respect. What I am here to stop is the uninformed buyer. The person who watches an auction on television and sees paddles flying and concludes that the prices reflect value rather than emotion. The person who reads Rare Classic in a marketplace listing and assumes the seller is a reliable narrator. The person who hears numbers matching and stops asking questions. The classic car world is extraordinary. There are genuine treasures out there, cars that will reward you mechanically, financially, and emotionally for decades. But finding those cars requires you to know what you're looking at, to do the homework, to bring in experts, and most importantly, to be willing to walk away from the wrong car no matter how right it feels in the moment. Don't get scammed. The car isn't worth it. Your money is. If you want to know which vintage vehicles are actually worth your investment, the ones that hold value, reward restoration, and deliver on every promise the classic car world makes, that video is coming next. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. And if today's video saved you from a bad decision, hit the like button. Because somewhere out there is a seller with a blurry Facebook Marketplace photo who is not going to be happy that you watched this.